Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 784B, and today's date is October 6, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. Spreading Propaganda to Provoke Russia into an Incident That Will Spark War. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. The interview with Willem Middelkoop is now uploaded to the X22 Report Spotlight. You can go right over to YouTube, type in X22 Report Spotlight. It will bring you right to the video. Or you can come over to the x22report.com site. Just scroll down a little bit and you'll see the video on the right-hand side. Let's get right into the economic collapse geopolitical news. Now, I talk about Common Core quite a bit, and we're starting to realize that the Common Core books are hitting many of the states. And I did an interview with Dr. Duke Pesta, and if you want to see that interview, you can go to the X22 Report Spotlight channel, and you can listen to that interview. But what's very interesting about this is that a Texas mother, and she posted this online, that her son's high school textbook is referring to African slaves as workers. They took the word slaves out of there. And of course, the book publisher saying, oh, this was an oversight. We didn't mean to do this. No, basically what happened was they got caught. And if you notice and you take a look at all of these Common Core books, most of them are written in the government's viewpoint, the messages the government wants to push out there. And the government, it changes history, changes the way we think. At least this is what they're trying to do. And they're doing it on purpose because they realize if they can change a generation of young people, they will have workers, because this is what they really want. The central bankers, the corporations, the elite, they don't want people free thinking. They don't want people with opinions. They don't want people with rights. They want obedient workers, period, that just do what they have to do, and that is it. And we can see at this point in time, this is what they are pushing. Now, the shooting in Oregon, we see that this whole thing was a complete false flag event. And it looks like they're trying to get Sheriff John Hanlon to resign. Now, he's an elected sheriff, and right now the governor, Kate Brown, says, no, we can't just remove him. The voters voted him in, and if the people don't want him in there, they're going to have to vote him out. But the Brady campaign, to prevent gun violence, they are calling for his resignation. They don't want him looking into this case whatsoever. Of course, they're saying that his extremist views on gun rights are called into question. I think what they're more afraid of is that when he looks into this, he might find out that this whole thing was planned. It was a false flag. And if he gets too close, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in a car accident or shot dead in some type of policing incident or something like that. Now, after the shooting in Umpqua Community College and also in Sandy Hook, we noticed something very interesting, is that there's always a surge in gun sales right after these mass shootings. And of course, we know these mass shootings are false flag events. So more and more people are actually buying weapons than giving up their weapons after these mass shootings. Now, Obama is out there, and he's claiming that other countries with no guns are safer. And he's saying those states with the most gun laws have the fewest gun deaths. Well, that's not true in Chicago, and they have the strictest gun laws. For the second straight weekend, more than 50 were shot in Chicago. Gun violence in Chicago equals a mass shooting every week. Now, the everyday law-abiding citizen cannot get these guns. A lot of them are putting out a long waiting lists, and you have to, fill out huge amount of forms. But the black market, the criminals, they have no problem getting these weapons. And when we look at this closer, we see that Obama basically is not really using all the statistics to make his claim. A Washington Post fact checker notes the president claims was based on misleading August 28th National Journal article by Libby Eisenstein that has been touted by gun control groups. The article bizarrely excluded many states with low homicide rates and few gun laws in reaching the conclusion that the states with the most gun laws have the fewest gun-related deaths, while states with the fewer regulations typically have much higher death rates from guns. The National Journal disproportionately excluded low-crime, pro-gun states such as Vermont, South Dakota, Maine from its chart of homicide rates precisely because their homicide rate was low. These states have few gun laws. Vermont has the least of any state and very low homicide rates. If you disproportionately exclude unregulated states that are safest from the calculation of which states have the lowest homicide rates, that will create the false impression that states with the most gun laws have the fewest gun deaths. So basically, he took the information, left out what he didn't want to promote his agenda, and that is taking away the weapons from all the people here in the United States. Because this is their agenda. When you look through all this emotional junk, you see this is really what they want to do. Why? The question is always, why would they ever want to do this? Because they understand a people with a weapon in their hand, they are not controllable. A population with no weapons, they are controllable. They can't fight back. The founding fathers knew this. This is why we have freedom of speech and then the Second Amendment to back up the freedom of speech. Can you imagine if this entire country had no weapons? Do you think the other rights would stand? They wouldn't. Even though we were born with them, even though the government can't take them away, if you had nothing to fight back with, you know that the government would say, we don't care. We have the weapons. You'll do what we say. And the founding fathers knew this. Now, at this point, we see that the government, they are continually pushing their agenda to take the rights away from the people. Now, of course, they just can't take them away because we're born with our rights. The government cannot take them away. They're not privileges. But of course, in the Common Core books that are being distributed among the public schools, they are kind of changing this, trying to convince the youth of America that rights are actually privileges and the government does have the right to take them away. And of course, they're using examples of how would you change the rights, which they just can't be changed, as we know. States have to come together. There has to be a majority. And the government just can't come in and say, okay, we're going to change this right. But we're starting to see that they are violating our rights. And a mayor in Stockton, California, Anthony R. Silva, he attended a recent mayor's conference in China, but his return trip took a bit longer than expected. At the San Francisco International Airport, agents with the Department of Homeland Security detained him. They confiscated his cell phone, his laptop, and any other electronic device that he had. And according to the mayor, this is not even the most alarming part. He said that they didn't produce a search warrant. And basically they were saying, listen, we can do this. And we have every right to do this. And they took his property and they wanted his passwords for all the devices. And they told him that you will not be able to leave unless you give us your passwords. They told him he had no right to a lawyer to be present, and that being a U.S. citizen did not entitle him to rights at all, which is completely false. He has every right. He doesn't have to relinquish his passwords. He doesn't have to concede to a search. And this is a complete violation, but they're trying to brainwash the people to convince them that these rights don't exist anymore. And he said, I think the American people should be extremely concerned about their personal rights and privacy. I briefly had to remind myself that this was not North Korea or Nazi Germany. This is the land of the free. And this is not what freedom looks like. And it doesn't. And what's happening here is the American people are starting to wake up. Remember, all of these things start out very slowly. And people always say, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just one little check. Oh, they want to run scanners through us. And then they introduce another law. And then they say, okay, you know something? Now we need your passwords. Now we can search you at any time. Now those rights don't exist. And they do this very, very slowly over time. So most people don't give it any thought until it's too late, until you look back and say, wait a minute. I used to have the freedom where I was able to walk into the airport all the way up to the plane and wave goodbye to the person leaving. Today, you're allowed into the airport doors, and that's the furthest you can go if you don't have a ticket. I remember a time you were allowed all the way in up to the airplane itself. Today, it's completely changed. So you can see how slowly this is happening. But now we're seeing it accelerate. And the patience of American people, it's running thin at this point. I mean, allgov.com reports that the resistance is growing to invasive Border Patrol questions regarding citizenship at rising numbers of checkpoints far removed from the nation's borders. And we knew this was going to happen. They're issuing the Real ID, which is going to have all your information, which is going to be all sent to a federal database. It's going to have your iris scan. It's going to have your fingerprints. It's going to have an RFID chip. It's going to have the barcode. And eventually what they're going to do is have checkpoints. And we can see that this is actually happening. And now Americans are refusing to answer questions by the Border Patrol agents. And these checkpoints aren't even on the border. And these border agents are saying, well, you're in the 100 miles, so this is the unconstitutional free zone. And we could do whatever we want here. And a lot of people are saying, you know something? I am not giving you my information. The Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects Americans from random and arbitrary stops and searches. Period. The end. And Border Patrol agents cannot search vehicles without the consent from the driver or a search warrant. This is coming from a civil rights legal group. But we know that this cannot happen. But people feel guilty for some reason saying no to the agents. Well, we shouldn't feel guilty. It's our rights. Actually, they should feel guilty asking us as a U.S. citizen for no reason whatsoever. They're the ones who should have the guilt, not the everyday person who's going about their business. But again, the founding fathers knew this. They fought for this. This is why they created the Constitution. We've never been through this before. We're going through it now. We see that Obama wants to bring in illegal immigrants. He wants to bring in the refugees. And we know the refugees that are coming out of the Middle East, most of them are not even Syrian, but it doesn't matter to them because what they're trying to do is bring in more and more bodies into the United States. Remember, he has to hit 22 million people for Obamacare to work, and he's falling short. And this is why he wants to make all the illegals here citizens so they can put them on Obamacare. But right now, the Department of Homeland Security has approved 90% of refugee applications from Syria, despite not having any adequate way to run a background check. So they're just letting them in, and we just can't run background checks right now. So we have no idea who they are. Pretty much what they've been doing with the illegals that are coming over the border. And they want to increase this to 85,000 in 2016 and bring the number up to 100,000. But this plan might be stopped because of what Russia is doing in Syria at this point. Now in Afghanistan, we understand the U.S. came in, bombed an Afghan hospital. Of course, they were blaming it on the Afghanistan government. They called in the strike. And now it looks like they're saying, okay, it was a mistake. The deadly airstrike that hit the hospital was a mistake made within the U.S. chain of command. And this is coming from the American commander of international forces in Afghanistan. And he's being drilled right now and saying, yes, this was a terrible mistake and this shouldn't have happened. And the Doctors Without Borders is saying this is equivalent to a war crime. Now, I cannot believe that they didn't know this was a hospital. And it's funny when you look at the pictures, you see, patients, doctors, but you see no other armed personnel that were killed at all in any of these pictures. And I can't believe that with all the technology and all the satellite surveillance and all the advanced equipment, they didn't know this was a hospital. Of course they did. What they're really doing is they're hitting people of the country who don't want the puppet government in Afghanistan anymore. That's really what's happening. That's what's happening in Yemen, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq. And we see out in Yemen, they're hitting schools, hospitals, killing 2,000 plus civilians. And if you look at this, it's all the same. There is absolutely no difference. Now, out in Ukraine, we see that the Ukraine parliament is going to legalize foreign mercenaries. Let's just call it what it is, paid mercenaries. They're going to allow them to fight in their country. And of course, they're saying the goal is to increase the armed forces' combat capability and reduce Ukraine's human and financial losses resulting from combat actions in eastern Ukraine. And what they're really saying is that the people of Ukraine do not want to fight. So now what they're going to do, with the assistance of the UK, the United States government, and other nations, they're going to bring in paid mercenaries to fight against the southeastern people. And this is why this was just approved right now, because we understand the Minsk II ceasefire agreement expires at the end of the year. We'll see if Kiev extends it, because they've been giving word, and the U.S. is still in there training the armed forces, that the Minsk II ceasefire agreement is the only agreement, and if this doesn't work, there is no other. So we're going to have to watch this situation very, very carefully. Now, we understand that the United States government central bankers are continually pushing war with Russia, China, North Korea, Syria, Iran, Brazil, India, you name it, they'll be pushing this. And the equipment that the United States has right now is not very good, especially when you compare it to what China and Russia has right now. The F-35 is basically a lemon. I mean, there's no other way to look at this. And right now, the F-35, they had helmet troubles. They've had the hook that grabbed the line when they were landing on an aircraft carrier. And now, when a pilot wants to eject from the seat, it could snap the neck of the pilot. The ejection test performed in a slow-flying speed mode in August revealed that the pilot's US-16E seat construction by Martin Baker has an excessive forward rotating momentum, which combined with force of the ejected seat basically snapped the neck of the dummy. And we know the F-35 lost dogfights to older U.S. aircraft. And we know that the newer Russian and the new Chinese aircraft are much more advanced, much more maneuverable, and right now it's no match to the Russian and Chinese jets. And we have to remember, we've been fighting countries like Yemen, Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, and these are not advanced countries with advanced weapons. when they push this war forward, we will be fighting countries that have weapons equal to or better than the United States. And right now, the United States, and they've run the scenarios, the United States cannot win. The U.S. is warning China in the South China Seas about basically allowing ships to have free navigation through the region. And they're doing this over and over, if you notice, to provoke China. Just like they keep saying Russian aggression, Russian aggression. And they're going to continually do this because they are provoking these countries. They want them to do something. And if they can't do it, the United States will basically push a false flag forward to make it look like these countries did something to the United States. Now, Finland basically busted the refugee myth. Now, we understand that Turkey, over the years, was bringing in more and more refugees, and they released them, millions of people, to make it look like they were all coming from Syria. But the head of Finland's immigration services said that out of the 19,632 refugees that have arrived in Finland this year, over 15,000 are adult males. The number of females were about 2,816, and there were about 2,000 children. And only 409 to be exact, of the refugees actually came from Syria. The others came from Iraq. So they didn't come from Syria. And we've been hearing a lot about this, that all of these refugees are from all different countries. Now, who caused this refugee problem? Well, it was the United States. Why? Because they went into each one of these countries, they overthrew the elected government, and they put in a puppet regime. And the people who are fighting against the puppet regime and the United States government, they basically are leaving because all they're seeing is war in their country. They're seeing humanitarian crisis in their country, and they're seeing their economy completely collapse. This is what we see in each one of these countries. Now, we see the fight with the Islamic State is going very well for Russia. Iraq is saying, you know something, it's going so well in Syria, we might want Russia in Iraq. We'll give them an airport, an air base, and we would like them to help us fight against the Islamic State. Now, the only problem is in Iraq it's a little different because the Islamic State is only used to create chaos. In Iraq, it's actually the people who are rising up trying to take back their country. They want their country back, and they're fighting. The same thing that's happening in Libya, Lebanon, and Yemen. And we'll have to see what Russia does at this point, but they're very busy in Syria right now. Now, we continually hear reports of Russia hitting the wrong targets, Russia hitting civilians, and we found out that the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights was a one-man show, and he ran it from his bedroom. And of course, this was sponsored by the UK, the United States. The corporate media received the news from him. And basically, he hasn't been back to Syria in 15 years. He doesn't even know his contacts because the contacts in Syria are through a friend of a friend of a friend. And most of the information that he's receiving is third, fourth hand. So how is everyone depending on this? Because no one really knows what's going on. They just hear Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and they think, oh, they must be on the ground. Oh, they must be observing this. But they're not. They're the ones who came up with the barrel bombing story. They're the ones that came up with that Russia was hitting civilians before Russia was even flying the jets in Syria. So we can see all of this is complete propaganda. NATO and the United States, they are pushing out more propaganda, saying that Russia needs to stop their attacks. They're hitting the Syrian opposition. They're hitting civilians, and they're continually doing this. Don't we know by now that the U.S. and NATO, they lie Remember Ukraine? Russia's invading. They have 100,000 troops in there. They have tanks. They're flying planes in. It was all a complete lie. That's why they gave us the fuzzy satellite photos. They never could prove it. The same thing is happening right now. Actually, Russia's saying we can't even find the Syrian opposition. It looks like they're all folded into the Islamic State because that is the proxy army for the United States government. Basically, there's nothing left of the Free Syrian Army, the opposition. And Russia's saying this is absolutely illogical that we're going after the Syrian opposition groups. We can't even find them. And of course, as we know, they're just using this to use it as propaganda to provoke Russia. And of course, they're making a big deal how Russia flew into Turkey. And there's a couple stories out there. One, there was bad weather. Other, there was a redrawn map and the pilot lost course and quickly corrected. But they're just continually going on and on, trying to push this as they're invading Turkey, which makes no sense because Turkey and Russia are working out a deal to have the Turkish Stream pipeline come into the country. So this is how you know this is complete propaganda all the way through. Obama right now is going to resupply the Syrian opposition, the Islamic State, and basically most likely drop more and more supplies off for them. Russia right now destroyed 20 Islamic State tanks. They hit 3 rocket launchers, and they're continually pushing the Islamic State back. Actually, 3,000 of the Islamic State fighters completely left Syria and they ran back into Jordan. Hey, one of the places where they were trained. So we can see right now they are doing their job and they're pushing them back. Russia's saying that the Islamic State, the proxy army for the United States government central bankers, they're playing dirty tricks. What they're doing is they're taking all their weapons and moving them very close to mosques. They know that Russia will not bomb them there. They're hiding behind civilians. So you can see who really does these tricks. Remember when they said Assad was really doing this? No, it's always the opposite. The proxy army for the United States government is actually doing this. Russia released a drone film showing the Islamic State moving their military hardware to residential areas, including one near a mosque. And Russia's saying they will not bomb those areas. So if they're not going to bomb those areas, how are they going to get the Islamic State? Eventually, we know an air campaign cannot work without the ground forces. And there is speculation that there will be ground forces. It could be China, it could be Iran bringing in ground forces. Russia's saying we're not bringing in ground forces, but if there's volunteers, we're not going to stop them. And most likely they're having people volunteer into service, and we will see ground troops in Syria with other nations. And you have to remember, the difference here is that the elected government asked for assistance from Russia to come into his country. And if you read the Syrian constitution, the leadership is in Damascus. He was elected by the people, and the only way for Assad to be removed is for the people to say, we don't want you here. And the United States and the coalition forces were never asked to come into Syria. They just decided they were going to go into a sovereign country and start bombing. They basically have invaded the country of Syria. So right now the U.S. cannot set up a buffer zone. It's completely impossible. The Russian planes and the United States jets that are flying in Syria, they are very close to each other, and it would only take one incident to really kick off World War III. I mean, this is how tense the situation is at this point in time. And the United States knows it's losing the war right now, especially the war in Syria and the propaganda war. So they've come up with other scenarios. They're saying that, okay, what we'll do, we will allow Assad safe exit from his country if he leaves right now. Why in the world would he do that? He has China, Russia, and Iran working with him to remove the Islamic State from his country. I mean, the United States right now is looking at this, and they have nothing else to do at this point. And since they're put into a corner, this is when everyone should start to worry. Because when they're put into a corner and there's no other options, they resort to a false flag. And we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.